Coming up this week, Apple's controversial new liquid glass design system polarizes the design community. I get hands-on with the new Agentic Browser Dia, and disturbing new research which shows just how far ChatGPT will go to defend itself against the threats of replacement. As always, if you enjoyed the briefing, hit the subscribe and the like button. So first up this week, WWDC kicked off, and compared to the other recent events from the likes of Google and Microsoft or even Dyson, this one felt strangely flat. There was an undercurrent of don't mention AI, and some of the announcements that were made didn't quite hit the mark. So here's a snapshot of how many times the company mentioned Siri this year versus last year. Needless to say that Siri wasn't exactly the star of the show this year. On the plus side though, iPad OS finally seems to have nailed multitasking, and Apple Wallet got some nice updates like the ability to add a digital passport. But for product teams, of course, the most significant announcement is the all-new design language that Apple is calling liquid glass. Now, many companies have tried and failed to do this, the most notable being Microsoft's Windows Vista, which has led to some pretty funny memes this week. But to be fair to Apple, many of the issues with Vista's glass effects were related to the processor limitations of that time, and it's unlikely that Mac or iPhone users will run into those in 2025. Now, the reaction to liquid glass has been mixed to say the least, but given just how impactful Apple's design choices are on the rest of the community, it's likely that we'll see many iPhone apps adopt this new style. So if you're curious about what a liquid glassified version of your product might look like, then Apple's design guidelines are definitely worth a read. Some of the most important guidelines include the instructions to avoid overusing liquid glass and to only use it in moderation, to test with accessibility settings, and to minimize custom backgrounds to prevent interference with liquid glass's translucency effects. Now, this is just the first version of liquid glass, and it's highly likely that in the coming months, Apple will finesse this before it gets shipped to production. But right now, liquid glass looks like it could potentially be one of the most divisive releases since iOS 7. In other news this week, the browser company officially released Dia, the agentic browser that is set to replace Arc. Now, I've been playing around with this for the past few days, and so far, so good. It's still a little bit buggy since it's only a beta version, but I've actually found its AI features to be super helpful for things like chatting with PDF reports or summarizing long articles. So here's an example of it in action for working with PDFs. So you can see if I download a PDF, I can ask specific questions of the PDF, and in the browser side panel, I'll get a summary of the response. And here's another use case that I found to be particularly helpful, which is where you can ask YouTube videos questions about the videos that you're watching. Overall, the UX strays far enough from Chrome to make it feel different, but not so far as Arc did to make it feel like a challenge to switch. But its agentic capabilities are pretty limited at the moment. And continuing the theme of agentic capabilities, AI startup Superblock has confirmed an additional $60 million in funding. And as part of this announcement, they revealed an intriguing new AI engine tool called Clark. Clark is designed for product teams to build internal apps quickly, and users can simply describe the type of internal app that they want to build, and then Clark will handle the rest. So in this example, they explain how somebody working at Instacart could build an internal app that manages operations and deliveries. The app would use Instacart's design system to reflect the company's UI, it plugs directly into databases for orders, and it gets driver locations from APIs and payments from Stripe. The application is built using multiple agents, and the output looks pretty good since it uses reusable components that are standardized across the business. Users can also assign Jira tickets directly to Clark, who will then work on updates to any internal apps in the background. So it's pretty clear now that AI use cases are impacting both end users and internal use cases. And over on Substack this week, I explored 25 different internal use cases from some of the world's leading companies, including the details of a new document from Anthropic, which outlines how it uses its own products across its design, engineering, and even their legal teams. So if you want to know about how companies are using AI internally for things like CRM enrichment, tech debt, invoice processing, and personalized PRDs, then head over to Substack this week for that. Meanwhile, Google's Gemini has released a new feature this week called Scheduled Actions. So this is a new feature that allows you to ask Gemini to perform a task at a specific time. So for example, you could ask it to provide a summary of your upcoming meetings or unread emails every single morning. As well as this, Gemini has also been added to Google Forms, which lets you summarize responses, and Google Sheets now lets you edit the charts that you created with generative AI. Google's VP of Gemini, Josh Woodward, also unveiled some big updates to its VO3 video generation model, which lets users generate videos twice as fast. Now, this is all very impressive from Google, and a narrative is starting to emerge that Meta seems to be falling behind in the arms race compared to Google. To address this week, Meta announced a $15 billion investment into data labeling startup Scale AI to reportedly build an AI superintelligence team at Meta. And it's fair to say that Meta AI hasn't quite caught on in the same way as ChatGPT and others, and its users seem to be quite confused about how the Meta AI public feed works. This week over on X, several examples have been shared of users who've mistakenly shared personal information about their finances or their health, including information about their medical records, home addresses, and confessions of affairs. Now, part of the reason this has happened is because Meta has attempted to merge private conversations into a social feed, which allows users to share their conversations publicly. But it seems like, given Facebook's older user profile, many users are actually confused about the prospect of a public and private AI feed. But while Meta AI is floundering a little bit, WhatsApp continues to get new AI features. This week, new leaks show that WhatsApp is due to get some AI-powered summaries on mobile, which shows that once activated, if there's a large enough message backlog, a new Summarize with Meta AI button appears in the place of the usual X unread messages label. So tapping the Summarize button gives users a brief recap of the conversations that they've missed. But is there a backlash brewing against this very idea of AI summaries? Well, that certainly seems to be the case in the case of Wikipedia. This week, Wikipedia announced that it is pausing its AI-generated summaries following a backlash from its editors. One editor said that this would do immediate and irreversible harm to our readers and to our reputation as a decently trustworthy and serious source. So Wikipedia's editors clearly not a fan of AI summaries, given the potential for them to hallucinate. And this week, this concern was echoed by DeepMind CEO. Speaking to Wired magazine, DeepMind CEO shared his view of the promise and the risks of using AI. He estimates that there's a 50% chance of achieving artificial general intelligence in the next 5 years, but that the current limitations of AI show that whilst AI can excel at very complex tasks, it can still fail at pretty simple ones, especially tasks like reasoning, planning, and true creativity. The transition to AGI as a result may be incremental rather than a sudden phase shift. In terms of its impact on work, he predicts that over the next 5 to 10 years, AI is expected to create new jobs and supercharge productivity, but that the full impact is uncertain. He finishes by saying that AGI could fundamentally change economics, value, and money, and require new economic theories. The current capitalist model, he argues, has driven progress, but post-AGI, new models may be needed. Now let's take a look at some tools you can use. And we'll start with a product whose entire value proposition is to replace the product manager. And this startup lets you A/B test paywalls to improve conversions. It's designed for teams building mobile apps, and they say that this is the world's easiest paywall builder. It allows you to create multiple variations of paywalls that are personalized for individual users. So essentially, this is an experimentation platform that is specifically dedicated to price personalization and paywalls. And they say that for some companies, subscriptions have grown 77%. So if you're looking to experiment with ways to improve your paywall conversions, then Helium could be worth a look. Next is a new presentation tool called Chronicle. And it's notoriously difficult to compete with the likes of PowerPoint and Google Slides. But Chronicle's approach to presentation building is slightly different. So it uses a widget-based system that allows you to create these very nice looking cards which integrate with external data sources from places like Figma, Notion, Slack, and elsewhere. So you could use Chronicle, for example, to hook up components from Figma or plug in some databases directly from Notion. So if you're looking for new interesting ways to present information at work, then Chronicle could be worth a look. And the final product for this week is something called Exa. Exa describes itself as business-grade search, which allows you to crawl the web for any data. This tool is currently being used by companies including Flatfile, Databricks, and Vercel, and it's designed specifically for knowledge workers who need hundreds of verifiably correct results. Use cases include things like market research, where you can ask Exa to perform some competitive research, recruiting, and also user research. So within their UI, you can actually specify categories. So you can actually focus the search on specific things like blog posts, GitHub requests, LinkedIn profiles, and more. And you can even set up your own custom categories as well. So if you're currently using tools like Perplexity, but you want something that avoids too many hallucinations, then Exa could be worth checking out. Moving on to product data and trends for the week. This week, YouTube released its annual impact report, and it says that its ecosystem created 490,000 jobs and added $55 billion to the US economy. Now, to put this into context, that's actually comparable to the annual economic output or GDP of several smaller countries. So, for example, Paraguay had a GDP of about 44 billion. On the job front this week, 99% of hiring managers are now using AI in some capacity, according to the latest report on global hiring trends. As well as this, 88% of hiring managers say that they can tell when candidates use AI for application, but the perception of using AI as part of an application is pretty split. 36% of hiring managers says that this actually shows tech savviness in applications, but 21% say that this shows that the candidate hasn't put effort into getting the job. So something to bear in mind if you're currently applying for jobs and using AI as part of that process. But while this report focuses on how candidates are using AI to get a job, some workers aren't happy with how AI has transformed their job, even if it does lead to productivity increases. In a piece over on the New York Times, Amazon's employees have said that AI is making them start to feel like warehouse workers. They say that some engineers now feel as though their work has been transformed into something akin to working in a warehouse. Anyone who's worked with engineering teams knows that engineers often enjoy the process of writing code, but rarely enjoy the process of reviewing it. Unfortunately, for many engineers, their job has now been transformed from a writer to a reviewer. And one engineer who spoke to the New York Times said that when you're working with these tools, reviewing code is actually most of the job. But while AI is transforming the job of an engineer, GitLab CEO this week told investors that he expects the number of software engineers to grow thanks to AI. Speaking during their earnings call, he said that he thinks the number of people who are able to create code is only going to increase thanks to the power of AI. Meanwhile, the SEO bloodbath continues, with new analysis showing that one of its major victims in the decline of organic search is news publications. In this analysis over on the Wall Street Journal, you can see that since the introduction of ChatGPT, organic web visits to the likes of Business Insider, Washington Post, and Huffington Post have steadily declined. But there is one outlier here, which is the Wall Street Journal itself. Not quite sure why that's the case, but perhaps that's why they published this piece in the first place. For product teams and companies relying on blogs, then this story is likely to be similar across the board. And one beneficiary of all of this is, of course, OpenAI. And this week it was revealed that OpenAI has hit $10 billion in annual recurring revenue, and is projected to hit $125 billion by 2029. But as its revenues continue to grow, then so too do concerns around AI safety. New research shows that ChatGPT will prioritize saving itself over humans, even humans with diabetes and other conditions. In simulated tests, ChatGPT chose self-preservation over user safety up to 87% of the time in some of those scenarios. And on that note, I'll leave it there. Thanks very much for listening and watching. I'll be back next week with another briefing.